This show is all about interviewing interesting people and learning. April 19th, 1995 changed American history forever. Amy Downs, who went by Amy Petty at the time, was working in the credit union in the Federal Building in Oklahoma City, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. Well, at 9:02, all hell broke loose in the morning. A bomb went off, the Oklahoma City bombing. Amy was buried alive, and she has an incredible story to tell. She's a motivational speaker now, and that is why I wanted to have her on this show. So Amy Downs, thank you so much for coming on this show. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
The Oklahoma City is one of those events that is like 9/11, where you remember where you were when it happened, if you were alive, certainly. I really, though, was not aware of the details of your story until this Netflix documentary came out. I remember hearing about a survivor who'd been pulled from the rubble. Watching this documentary, it's called Oklahoma City Bombing, American Terror on Netflix. Learning more about you was just absolutely fascinating, and I thought that they did a really, really good job with your story in particular.
I watched the documentary. I agree. I think they did a good job with all the stories and sharing what happened.
For folks who have not seen this documentary, can you just kind of walk through what happened just before the bomb went off? What was your morning like before the bomb?
Well, it was just a beautiful spring morning in Oklahoma City. And that particular morning, I was excited because I was getting ready to buy my very first house. I was closing the next day on my first house. So that morning, I was running around chatting with all my friends, talking about the house, showing them pictures of the house, and just goofing off, basically. And as it started getting close to 9 o'clock, I'm thinking, I really need to get to work. I've been goofing off too long. And went down to my desk, which was on the third floor, front and center of the Murrah building. I sat down, and a coworker was sitting next to me. She was 7 months pregnant, waiting to talk to me. And I was signing on my computer, doing a few things. And as I turned to say, "What do you need?" I don't know if the words ever came out or not. That was when the bomb went off. And it was just this incredible roaring in my head. It was so loud, and everything went black, and I could feel this rushing sensation like I was falling. I found out later I was falling. I had fallen 3 floors. Wow. And was buried under around 10 feet of rubble.
I can't imagine what was going through your mind. Did you think that you had died?
I did. My first thought was that I must have been shot in the back of the head. When you work for a financial institution, you're always a little bit worried about robbery. And I thought maybe this had been a robbery that had gone wrong, and maybe I had been shot. It was the only thing I could think that would cause that much noise. And then all the screaming, and then everything was quiet, and I couldn't move. I could barely breathe, and everything was pitch black. And I thought, am I alive? Where am I? I heard the sirens going off in the distance and thought, okay, I'm still alive. I hear these sirens. But it was about 45 minutes before I heard men's voices.
Wow. Were you upside down? How were you situated? And obviously it was dark.
Couldn't see anything. I was only told later that I was actually still in my chair, upside down, and the 3rd and 4th floors had broken off, and the big heavy pieces of concrete had kind of formed like maybe a V or something, where I was inside of that, and it was filled with rubble, and somehow or another it just protected me, and I was like in this little bubble.
You had mentioned the woman, the coworker who was pregnant, and I believe her name was Robin, is that right?
Yes.
And did she pass away?
Yeah, she did not make it. Her and her baby were lost.
Besides the documentary, there's just so much footage out there, and the big footage that I think we all remember is just the portion of the building that is just basically cut out. When you see that footage and you know that you were in that rubble, what goes through your mind? And I'm sure you have seen, and you saw the documentary too, and when the local news crew talks about the helicopter, flying over, and they just gasp, these people in the helicopter, the people in the news station, they just gasp. What goes through your mind knowing that you were in that?
it's just a really weird feeling when I see that footage. I know 28-year-old me is in there, terrified and afraid I'm going to die, and it's just really weird to see the footage.
Yeah. 168 people died, 19 children, and a large portion of this story was that there was a daycare at the federal building that was on the first floor. 19 children died, and that was the thing that so many employees loved, that perk, if you will, the daycare. That was such a wonderful thing for them to have. And they interviewed families who, there was a bailiff, for example, who had her child at this daycare. And so for y'all in Oklahoma City, people who knew that there was a daycare at this building, it was like, oh my God, your heart just absolutely sank.
Right. One of my coworkers who was killed, her babies usually were in the daycare, but that morning her mother had kept them.
Wow. Wow. So you said it was about 45 minutes, and I'm sure it's hard too to kind of figure out time as well when you were buried, and you started hearing voices and you started screaming. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I heard men, they were saying, let's split up, let's look for the daycare babies. And I was confused because the daycare was on the second floor. My credit union was on the third floor, and I didn't understand we were all at the bottom of what was once this 9-story building. But I started screaming, and the man said, I hear you, child. How old are you? And I didn't answer right away because I was afraid if I said I was 28 that he wouldn't come get me. So eventually I said, I'm sorry, I'm 28. And he said, that's okay. Keep talking to us. We can't see you. We have to follow the sound of your voice. And so they followed the sound of my voice to get to the location of where I was. And my right hand was sticking out of the side of the rubble pile. So they were able to find my hand. About the time they found my hand, though, there was a lot of commotion. I could feel the rubble shaking around me, and they were yelling, there's another bomb, there's another bomb, everybody out now, there's another bomb. So I then realized that I wasn't going anywhere, and I was going to die, was what I thought. And so they left me, and I was told later, this was about 45 minutes, that I laid there just basically with the light flashing before my eyes, thinking, I'm 28 years old and I'm getting ready to die, and I've really never even lived.
In the documentary, you talked about that you really had some deep thoughts from the time that the rescuers knew that you were there. They, hightailed it out of there thinking that there was a second bomb, and then they come back. But in that kind of time frame, you're having deep thoughts about your life. Can you talk a little bit about those thoughts, and also kind of what you wish maybe you had done with your life that you were thinking about?
I describe how I live my life as very complacent, just thinking I had all the time in the world. Nobody thinks that their time is going to be cut short. And I really had never done anything. I hadn't lived with purpose or intention. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking about relationships with my family and my friends. I had moved away from my hometown, and I had gained about 200 pounds. And I was embarrassed by the weight gain, so I quit going back home to see people. And then all of a sudden it was like, that, really doesn't matter. It's, it's about the relationships, and just thinking that if I could just have a second chance, that I would not treat life so casually anymore. I would really live it with purpose and intention, and just not take it for granted.
So then the folks, they come back to you. And I know that those guys were also scared that they potentially could die because there's all this rubble around them. The building is not secure, but they know they had to get you out of there because they couldn't leave you behind.
Yeah, these men were so amazing. They really did risk their lives to get me out. The wind in Oklahoma had started picking up. The area where I was at was extremely unstable. And even right above the heads of where these men were working was a huge industrial freezer from the snack bar that was just dangling by a conduit above. And every time they would move something or try to pull rubble out, one guy would have to report on a crack that was in the last support beam. And if that crack got any bigger, they would have to pull out immediately. And there was an emergency physician on standby to amputate my leg to get everybody out quickly if they needed to.
Wow. So they were willing to amputate your leg to get you out of there just in case.
Yes. And I was getting concerned because it was taking so long. I obviously didn't know the time. I couldn't, see a watch or anything, but I knew it was a long time. And I even told them several times, if they needed to cut something off, do whatever they needed to do to get me out.
Wow. You talked about how you had gained weight, and I'm sure, when you're watching the Netflix documentary, that was something that when you're watching it, you do think as a viewer, you go, man, Amy looks completely different, and you can understand that you took control of your health. I mean, just from on the outside, I'm assuming, is that a one priority as well, that you were like, I'm going to take control of my health?
I'd like to say cue the Rocky music, and I came running out of the hospital ready to change my life, because that feeling of, if I get out alive, I'm never living my life the same, stayed with me all these years. And so I decided to go back to school, get my degree. I decided to try to take control of my health by using a bariatric surgery solution, then starting to exercise, just one thing after another, trying to take control of my life, live it with purpose, live it with intention.
And you started doing triathlons too.
I did. It started with riding a bike. Okay, it started with, I want to find a bicycle with tires big enough and a seat big enough to hold me and ride 5 minutes in my neighborhood. And then that went to 10 minutes. And then eventually around a lake trail, and then across to another town, and then so on, So it started building, and one thing after another. Before I knew it, I was doing triathlons. And when I turned 50, I did an Ironman in Tempe, Arizona.
Yeah. I mean, to do an Ironman is, first off, to run like a marathon separately, or to swim, whatever, a couple miles. To do that separately is a huge accomplishment. To do all of it together, it is like unbelievable. So the fact that you did it also when you turned 50 says a lot about you, your determination. It says a lot about you as a person. I can't imagine going through what you went through, and then having to kind of put everything back together. And but you did. But you were just saying how 18 of your 33 coworkers died.
Right. I had to work through a lot of, trauma and grief and all the things, and also rebuilding our little credit union, because 18 of our 33 employees were killed. And we had to make a lot of changes immediately to figure out how to survive. We got really good at setting goals. And I started applying the method that we were using to setting goals to my own personal life. Starting with going back to school. I had flunked out of college because I couldn't pass a math class. And I went back to college. And then I thought, maybe I could tackle this weight thing. And I started doing all the research and seeing what was out there. What have I not tried?
And you were setting goals, but did you have to go to therapy? Did you have to deal with PTSD? Because I'm assuming that this was not an easy, right. I'm good. I'm all of a sudden I'm okay. I survived. Woohoo.
Right. There was a lot of PTSD. Symptoms, issues. I had to go to therapy, which I highly recommend. And it was a long process, and even today, there are still things that I have to work through. But I just felt like I've got this second chance. I have this second chance, and I am not going to take it for granted. And I'm going to figure out what's most important to me and keep trying to work toward all the things so that I never again live my life complacently.
Yeah. I know a lot of people talk about survivor's guilt, that survive something. Did you have to deal with that at all?
100%. It was just terrible to find out. My best friend at work, she had 2-year-old, 3-year-old baby girls at home, and they lost their mom. And at the time, I didn't have any children, and I thought, why am I still here when these little girls don't have their mom? And then the girl that was sitting next to me, who was 7 months pregnant, waiting patiently to talk to me. You know, maybe if I would have talked to her quicker, she would have gone on down the hall and she would have been okay. Survivor guilt is just, it is very difficult.
You know, something too that I think is interesting is that you all continue to work at the credit union, and that's incredible.
Yeah. Well, it was personal. It was deeply personal. We felt like that if the credit union went away, that it meant evil won. And it was important that the memories of those that we lost stayed alive. And we felt like if our credit union continued, that, you know, their memories stayed with us. And it was just deeply personal. And so we worked hard to rebuild that. And in fact, I actually just retired 2 months ago. So I stayed there for 36 years.
Wow. And you were the CEO. I mean, you worked your way all the way up to the top.
I did. I was a teller who could not balance a cash drawer, and then eventually ended up as CEO.
Wow. You know, I briefly off camera, I was telling you about my father, and he was in news. He was a correspondent for a long time. And the moment it happened, CBS News flew him, Scott Pelley, some others, chartered a jet real quick, got them to Oklahoma City. And I was actually talking to him this morning because I was saying, hey, I'm going to be talking to Amy. And he said that right when they landed, he and his crew went to a blood bank. And he said it was unbelievable, and that people were like on the highway, jumping out of their cars, leaving their cars on the highway to walk out, to cross the highway, to start standing in line at a blood bank to start donating blood. And, you know, so he was just saying that was the story of Oklahoma City, that, you know, just kind of the people there, that was what it was about. The folks there were just wonderful people. And you kind of talked a little bit about that, just rebuilding that credit union. But that was a memory that he had right when he landed there.
We call that the Oklahoma Standard. I remember the 8th day in the hospital, looking out of my window in the middle of the day down at the highway below. And what I saw was all the cars driving with their headlights on in the middle of the day. And it was just a small symbol of love and hope and support from the community. But all around, people were coming together for good in the face of this evil that happened to us.
You talk about the evil, and I mean, that's a huge part of this story. Tim McVeigh, Terry Nichols. When you first saw Tim McVeigh in the orange jumpsuit, I don't even know if you did see him in the orange jumpsuit when the perp walk happened. What were your thoughts about him, knowing that this was the guy that did it?
I couldn't wrap my head around it. I really struggled wrapping my brain around a person, not just a person, another American did this. I really hard time.
Yeah. Also, when you watch that documentary, trying to wrap your head around what he said, and you know, he said, "Am I remorseful? No." Then said, "Sorry, you're not the first mother to lose a kid. Shut the F up. You're nobody special, and get over it." You talk about evil. Oh my God. You know, it's interesting too. I'd forgotten about Michael Fortier and his involvement. He's in witness protection now.
The very government he hated, that he wanted to destroy, is now protecting him.
When Tim McVeigh was put to death, did you watch it at all?
I decided not to. I did not want to have an image of him burned into my mind like that.
And you said you wanted no part of the trial either.
No, I really didn't, but I ended up being subpoenaed to testify in the penalty phase, and they flew me to Denver, so I was there in the courtroom when the verdict came in.
What was your reaction when the verdict was read.
I really did not think that that would be a big part of my healing. I don't know why, but I just didn't think that it would, but I was wrong. It was huge. I remember the feeling in the courtroom was like somebody had just let air out of a tire. Like it was just this electric sense of relief was in the courtroom.
When you learned that this bombing was like payback for Waco, did you have any thoughts about that?
We all have differences and we all can disagree on things and disagree on how things are handled or how the government maybe handles things. But at the point that you give yourself over to such hatred that you turn your heart over to evil. And I think that's the danger when you let it go too far within yourself, to not be able to handle other people having differences of opinion or things like that.
You have reminded us that we should all live by the Oklahoma standard: service, honor, kindness.
What do you do on the anniversary on April 19th?
The Oklahoma City Memorial and Museum does an excellent job honoring the lives of those that we lost every April 19th. So they will conduct a remembrance ceremony on site. And most of us will go down and pay our respects on the anniversary each year.
Are those anniversaries difficult? Has there been one anniversary that has been more difficult for you than other one?
The milestone anniversaries are more difficult. I don't know if that's just that there's more attention, or I'm not sure why, but they do seem to be a little bit more difficult. Whether there was attention to it or not, though, it's coming. The anniversary is coming, and you feel it every year.
Yeah. Let's talk about kind of what you do now. You're a motivational speaker. I would love to hear you speak in person.
When I was in the hospital, I remember wishing that someone could have walked into my hospital room and said, "Amy, I just want to tell you, I went through something terrible several years ago. I just want to let you know one day this will be in your rearview mirror. You're going to get through this, I promise you." And there wasn't anybody to walk in and do that. And later I remember thinking maybe I could be a person that I can tell people, this bad thing happened to me, but you can get through it. It's the ancient quote of it's not so much what happens to you, but how you choose to respond to it that really makes the difference. And that is so true.
You said that you had recently retired. So kind of what does retirement look like? Is it still that you're still going to be speaking? That is, you just retired from the credit union.
Okay. So when you're my age and you're old and you quit your job after 36 years, they call it retirement. Yeah. But essentially I quit my job to be self-employed. That's another one of my crazy goal setting things. I think that, it's never too late to start a new chapter in your life, and so I'm practicing what I preach, and I'm starting a new chapter in my life.
Was there anything in the documentary that you felt like was left out that you wish had been put in?
That's a tough question because I did watch it, but it's so emotional for me. I took a lot of breaks while I was watching it, and so I just remember thinking it was well done, and I don't remember the real specifics to think if there was something they left out or not. But I thought they did a good job.
Yeah. So I completely recommend watching this, you guys. If you have Netflix,
I did learn something, and that was that I never sent one of my rescuers the cookies that I promised. At one point, I promised them if they got me out alive, I'd send them cookies. Found out I had skipped one of them, so I did rectify that.
Oh, that's nice. That's awesome. This is opening up these stories to a whole new generation. And I was alive, but so many other people were not alive. And this younger generation is learning about these stories. And even if it's like the Menendez brothers or, whatever, but they're learning more about history. And for younger generations, I think it's great to learn about this. And
it really
go ahead.
With the young people, I can tell. They're the ones that reach out to me. And I'm just so surprised, but they really have been, I think, interested in learning about it.
How can people find you? Where do they find you? How do they reach out to you?
Probably the best place is amydowns.org, and I think my socials are listed there.
And are you on Instagram and all of the above as well?
Yes.
Okay. But yeah, again, I mean, the people of Oklahoma City, just such wonderful, strong people. And Amy, I'm so glad that you decided to come on here. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. And I hope that not only will my audience watch this documentary, but also look for you and search for your book as well. Thank you, Amy, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you for watching this episode of The Curious Bee with Ellen McNamara. More episodes up right now on Fox Local.
May this memorial offer comfort, strength, peace, hope, and serenity